Good morning, everyone. This is David Quam with Dentons in Washington, D.C. You are joining the Dentons Weekly COVID-19 webinar series. We're going to get started in about 3 minutes. Thank you for being with us. We'll be right back. Again, for those of you just joining us, this is David Quam with Dentons in Washington, D.C. This is our Friday webinar series on issues related to COVID-19. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes. Thank you for being with us today. For those of you just joining us, we'll be starting in about 1 minute, just enough time to get one more cup of coffee. You are joining the Dentons COVID-19 webinar series. Pleasure to have you with us this morning. We'll get started in about 1 minute. Thank you for being with us. Good morning, everyone. Happy May 15th. This is David Quam with Dentons in Washington, D.C. You're joining our weekly webinar series, Key Issues Related to COVID-19. Today, we're going to take a look at some transitional themes, key themes as we define the next new normal. We're in a position of real transition, both at the state level, the federal level, and from a business standpoint. We're going to be taking a look at several of the issues that Dentons has taken a look at over the past several weeks. This webinar is the 11th Friday webinar we've had in our series. We've covered a number of different issues from force majeure to litigation, employment law, and small business opportunities. All of our webinars are available to you on our website and our COVID-19 hub. If you go under the US section, you will see all the resources available to clients and to the public from Dentons. We have over 110 client alerts and more than 30 webinars available for your viewing and review. Today, we're going to talk about three different topics. We're going to start with a policy discussion and overview of what's happening in Washington, D.C. Then we're going to look at transitions that are happening within the business and business community and issues related to employment law. I'm going to be joined later in this webinar by three of my partners, Peter Feldman with our Washington, D.C. Federal Regulatory and Compliance Group, Patil with our Business Services Group out of Louisville, Kentucky, and Jennifer Park does employment and labor law with our affiliate in Pittsburgh. Dentons is the world's largest law firm. We have over 180 offices in more than 73 countries. That range of both experience and expertise has put us on the front lines of the COVID-19 issue all around the world. Our partners, members, and clients have been in hotspots in China, Italy, Spain, and across the globe. We try to combine that experience to provide our clients with the best information of what is happening not only in the United States, but in Europe, Asia, and in every continent. That experience has also led us to try to provide really meaningful content for you here in the United States, looking at not just what is happening at the federal level, but also at the state and local level as well. For those of you doing business in the United States, I commend you to our 50 state tracker, where we have over 60 attorneys reviewing weekly what is happening at the state and local level, including executive orders from governors, what is happening from large city mayors in your largest urban areas, and also what is happening at the county level. This is a response, a governmental response that includes all levels of government. And here at Dentons, we're tracking all of those to make sure that you have the best information possible. Next slide, please. Again, my name is David Quam, and I help lead the Dentons 50 network here at Dentons. That is a 50-state network that includes affiliates in all 50 state capitals, trying to bring you the most relevant information of what's happening in the states and at the federal level. Next slide, please. As everyone knows, this is a nationwide pandemic. Different states have different levels of infections and deaths, yet every state has declared a state of emergency. Every state is dealing with a pandemic. Every state is involved at both at the federal level in the potential response. As a nation, governors have really started to take the lead with regard to response. They're also taking the lead with regard to what will happen next at the federal level. Let's go to the next slide. One of the biggest issues of the day, and a real focus on transition, is reopening the economy. Over 39 states have partially lifted the restrictions within their states, moving from a stay-at-home orders to what they call safer at-home orders. You're starting to see restaurants open, businesses open, and business start to return to a open status and a more transparent status across the states. This, however, is not uniform. Some states are doing it on a statewide basis, others are doing it on a more localized basis, and it's important to know exactly what is happening in your state and with your local jurisdictions. Local control is a very key part of many of these reopening orders. We are also starting to see conflict within the states as governors either move to reopen or to keep restrictions on, and there are differences of opinion at both the local level or with state legislatures. One thing to note is a recent case just yesterday from the Wisconsin Supreme Court that actually ended the governor's stay-at-home order when it was challenged by the legislature. Look for more of these types of challenges to executive authority in the weeks ahead. Next slide, please. Fortunately, many of these stay-at-home orders have had the effect of starting to slow the progression of the pandemic. They've started to bend the curve downward and lengthen the response time needed by states to handle the COVID-19 outbreak. As you'll see from the slide, the COVID-19 infections reported are starting to decrease. There is some hope that going into the summer that this will continue as the warmer months come. However, most public officials are now looking at the fall and what this transition means for schools reopening, universities reopening, and several businesses are now pushing their restart dates as far as allowing people back into their businesses to October or even the end of the year. This transition period will change a lot of policies and business practices in the days and months ahead. From a policy standpoint, the most important thing that's happening right now is happening at the federal level. The federal response has generally been one of first responding to the pandemic, then trying to stabilize the economy, and eventually it will move to trying to re-stimulate the economy and get people back to work. The House and the Senate are back at work in Washington, D.C., although on a remote basis. The House has recently introduced a nearly $3 trillion package, again, to try to help stabilize the economy, including state and local budgets. Two major issues that will be a part of contention during what we are calling phase 4, and really a stabilizing effort, is money to state and local governments to help them fill budget holes. And number 2, liability protection for businesses that reopen. There's been a strong call to allow businesses to provide immunity for businesses from being sued should a customer or an employee contract COVID-19 while on the job or visiting a premise, part of what it may take to reopen during this transition. Look for this debate to continue throughout the summer, and a final bill really not leaving Congress until possibly the end of June or the beginning of July. Later in the year, it will definitely be necessary for yet more legislation to try to stimulate the economy. Possibilities there include an infrastructure package to try to help put people back to work. Here at Denton's, we're tracking not only what's happening at the federal level, but also taking a hard look at what states are doing with the money that's coming to them, how they're helping their municipalities and their small businesses within their states. With that, we're going to move and talk transition with regard to some of our key issues that we have been following. The 3 leaders that I mentioned, Peter Feldman, Patil, and Jennifer Park, are all members of our special situations team, a team that was put together by Denton's to really help clients by being able to respond quickly to the emerging issues of COVID-19 over the past 11 weeks. With that, let's move to the next slide. And Peter, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, David, and thanks to all on the line for joining. This is Peter Feldman in Washington, D.C. And let me just say, I really appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts, share some perspective on what we're seeing out in the market across the country and frankly around the world from our perspective as the co-chairs of the Denton's Pandemic Special Situations team in the U.S. We've got a really clear line of sight to hundreds, really thousands of inquiries and issues arising on a daily basis from our clients and colleagues in over 30 cities in the US and another 150 or so cities around the world. And it's based on that deal flow, that volume, that we've identified some emerging trends which are framing the current landscape. Right now, we're at a pivot from initial response, from triage, from the question of what's going on and what do we do today? What do we do in the minute? And a pivot to starting to think about what comes next. What does a return to work, a return to school, a return to commuting, a return to retail look like? What does the future look like? And how do we transition from where we were to whatever it is that comes next? And David rightly framed it as the next new normal. It's in this moment of pivot that we see, from a business and a legal perspective, some of the same dynamics that David discussed in the political and policy world at the moment. We see the absence of a clear, uniform national approach to addressing the pandemic. And to be clear, that's not a value judgment. That's not to say it's good or bad. It's an observation, though, on the market. And whether the cause is our federalized structure, whether the cause is political, whether the cause is the disparate impact of the virus, the landscape that businesses and investors, that companies are looking at is 50 landscapes, I guess 51, including my hometown now of Washington, D.C. But even within each of these 50 plus one landscapes, there are also potentially significant differences, sometimes by region within a state, sometimes by county within a state. And this lack of a single uniform approach isn't limited to just the United States. This pandemic is global. And the response globally has actually somewhat mirrored that of the United States, in the sense that each country has had to take its own approach based on its own circumstances. And the result is a patchwork. It's a patchwork of laws, a patchwork of regulations and policies, and critically, a patchwork of expectations from employers and employees, from investors, from regulators and governments. And this patchwork has also yielded a patchwork of challenge and a patchwork of opportunity, and an increasing realization that for every business that's thinking about reopening, thinking about what comes next in the next new normal, there's a need to navigate not just one set of laws and regulations, but rather a need to navigate the patchwork itself. And this is because, notwithstanding the current prevailing policies of social distancing, of physical isolation, and similar, one of the things that we're seeing in the market is an increasing realization that supply chains, that financing agreements, that distribution networks, that customer bases, that talent pools, all of these building blocks of business are on the table. They all need to be considered. And while we've all become somewhat physically isolated over these last several weeks and months, businesses remain affected deeply by what goes on just one county over, or in another part of the state, or in the neighboring state, and frankly, around the world. And what this means, as my friends and my partners, Jen and Raja, will discuss in just a minute, is that the pivot from where we were to where we're going is a process. It's not a single event. It's not going to look the same for every business. And it's not going to be a mere check the box exercise. So it's, for better or worse, not going to be just a question of going back in, turning the lights on, opening the door, and everything is open and normal again. Now, sure, there will be box checking, there will be door opening, there will be light switching on, but that's not it. From what we're seeing, the pivot's going to require a really holistic approach, but also one that is really pragmatic. It's going to require understanding supply chains and distribution networks and customer bases. It's going to require new and really novel approaches to health and safety and to wellness. And it's going to require a combination of creative thinking and engagement to tap financial resources, including the trillions of dollars that the federal government has made available and that David referenced, with more potentially in the pipeline. But just as it's going to require that creative thinking and engagement, it's also going to require continued attention to fundamental business skills, to regulatory details. And all of this is going to require agility in a new normal where things are going to continue to move quickly without the ability for tremendous planning in terms of being able to anticipate what's coming around the corner with any degree of precision, other than to know that in this environment, things will move quickly, they will change shape quickly, and continued engagement is really the watchword. So to help walk through some of the key components of the pivot that we're seeing in the market, let me turn over to my friend in Pittsburgh, Jen Park from our Labor and Employment Group. Jen?
Thanks, Peter. Really appreciate it. I can sum up the employer takeaway from this webinar fairly easily. Be prepared and be aware. There's no template for return after nationwide shutdowns from the COVID-19 crisis. We literally learned something new about this disease and its effect on the communities around us on what seems to be a daily basis. And as David mentioned, there's currently no immunity for businesses related to COVID-19 infection that might occur on the premises. So what are we left with? Vigilance. And why? Because you don't want to not be prepared if something happens in the workplace and there's all this guidance out there on the state and state level and from the CDC, and you haven't followed any of it. The fact is, many states will defer to the CDC guidance on reopening, which is available on the cdc.gov website. Many state public health agencies will also rely upon that guidance and issue their own. Note, however, it's been my experience, having done an analysis over the past several days, that some of the state published guidance may not be current. They may not reflect as quickly the updates pushed out by the CDC related to, for example, the list of symptoms or industry guidance that is now available. So you want to be checking those updates. For employers who have been able to work at less than full capacity due to teleworking, it might be that you might want to continue to rely on this arrangement until you can put together a thorough plan. I think for other employers, you're going to want to be prepared to bring back your people to the physical space. That means understanding the latest guidance from the CDC, state executive orders, and public health agencies in those states. For those employers with multiple locations, this means reviewing multiple state guidance. And so start now rather than later. Although the situation will be unique for each employer depending on the COVID-19 community spread, the industry that you're involved in, and the way that you operate your own business, here's some common guidance for you. As employers, you should really consider the creation of a multidisciplinary committee or task force consisting of executive management, HR, IT, accounting, facilities, and client-facing departments to identify ways to minimize risks in the office as well as needs, especially if you have a hybrid type of arrangement where you provide services that some of which can continue to be done on a teleworking basis. Who needs to be in the office and why? And are we going to limit certain categories of people? Secondly, employers need to understand that extended periods of isolation under these shutdown orders have completely upended people's lives, and be prepared to direct employees to resources for mental health and other support. Third, you want to review any commercial leases for the rights and obligations of the parties thereunder, specifically as it relates to common areas in the building. Things such as even entry. How does one enter? Is it a finger entry? Is it a badge swipe? You're going to want to coordinate with the landlord to see what changes may be necessary to avoid as much sort of surface contact on those issues. Identify common areas in your facilities, such as bathrooms and kitchens and other high-touch areas like door handles, to develop a strategy to maintain social distancing and to minimize risk of COVID-19. You're also going to want to put together a plan to conduct health screening, perhaps temperature screening. Again, check jurisdictional requirements as to whether that's necessary and desirable. If you need to start ordering things, give yourself plenty of time, because those infrared thermometers that are out there, also called no-touch thermometers, they're really kind of hard to get on a quick basis. Everybody's ordering them. Give yourself plenty of time to order the disinfectant sprays, wipes, 60% based alcohol sanitizers, order the PPE for the facility, be it masks, gloves, or gowns, and have rules in place for their use, as well as training on each of those things in accordance with CDC state and local guidance. Another point I want to make is consider touchless paper towel dispensers, not air dryers. If you have air dryers, you should know that there are many studies that reflect that air dryers can actually blow contaminants around the bathrooms. That's something that I learned recently. Know what signs must be posted pursuant to, among other things, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, state unemployment laws, and other laws as a result of COVID-19. You should also be reviewing your sick leave and other policies and practices and update as necessary. So you want to account for things like teleworking arrangements, FFCRA requirements related to sick leave, childcare, etc. You also want to develop a communication protocol with key players and mechanisms to quickly communicate. If there is a suspected or confirmed case of COVID-19, you got to be in a position to move quickly. And you also have to know what you may or may not disclose pursuant to your ADA obligations, to the extent that you have sufficient number of employees and that applies. Know what contact tracing is, know how to do it, know how many people have been affected in the spider web of this potential case of COVID-19. or even someone who has symptoms consistent with it. Understand any recording and reporting obligations to OSHA you may have in the case of COVID-19 infection in the workplace. And last but not least, know when an employee with a confirmed COVID-19 test or symptoms consistent therewith may return to work. You want to be prepared to hit all those points and probably more depending on your industry and your business through vigilance. And if you haven't opened up yet in your state, you should start preparing now. Peter, that's all I have, and I'd like to now turn over the mic to Raja to talk about some interesting updates in the transactional space that might affect our clients.
Great, thanks, Jen. This is Raja Patil from the Denton's Louisville, Kentucky office. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. Thanks again for joining. Okay, so now the doors are back open, employees are back to work. Unfortunately, it doesn't stop there. Businesses have to figure out how to adapt to the new normal and be profitable, or at least, as the slide says, keep the lights on. Sadly, you can't turn your head these days without hearing the harsh realities. Unemployment rates are on the rise. Supply chains and customer bases are disrupted. Product channels are altered. Force majeure and material adverse change provisions are being triggered. Forbearance agreements are being entered into. Revenues are decreasing as costs are increasing. And many, if not most, businesses are facing a cash crunch. Unfortunately, without liquidity, many businesses are going to continue to struggle paying the bills. And frankly, it is not going to be a surprise to anyone if there's a wave of restructurings and bankruptcies around the corner. But there is hope. With change comes opportunity. And as my esteemed colleague Peter mentioned, successful businesses will be those that pivot. Some businesses will adapt and thrive and be stronger than ever before. There may be opportunities to buy out competitors or make strategic acquisitions. There may be opportunities to refocus or rebrand and trim expenses. And I don't think anyone can forget about the trillions of dollars of economic stimulus and loans that have been injected into the economy and the gamut of tax credits and business-friendly tax regulations that have been adopted in the last few weeks. Frankly, it's been a whirlwind of activity on all those fronts. First, it was the CARES Act that provided for the EIDL loan program, and now the famous or maybe infamous PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, the Main Street lending programs, and there's the FFCRA, the Families First Coronavirus Act, and now potentially the Health and Economic Recovery Omnibus Emergency Solutions Act, or the HEROES Act. That's a great name. But frankly, it's hard enough for businesses to keep track of the acronyms, much less the details of each of these programs. But in the new normal, it's going to be more important than ever that companies understand the options that are out there. As Peter alluded to, businesses need to view these options in a holistic and pragmatic way. But buyer beware, businesses need to look before they leap. These programs are passed in light speed fashion as compared to typical legislation. Many of the major terms are ambiguous, seemingly contradictory, and they are definitely changing on almost a daily basis. For example, it's no secret, many businesses have been struggling with the economic necessity certifications that are required in the PPP applications, even many weeks after the original certifications were made. Finally, on Wednesday of this week, the SBA released some much anticipated guidance regarding the certifications. The new guidance indicates that any borrower, together with its affiliates, that has received PPP funds in the principal amount of less than $2 million will have deemed to have made the economic necessity certifications in good faith. And the SBA made it clear they're not going to focus their audit resources on those borrowers. Borrowers with loans over $2 million who return their funds by May 18th will also be deemed to have acted in good faith. For borrowers that keep the money, if the SBA determines the borrower lacked an adequate basis for the certification, the SBA will seek repayment of the outstanding loan balance and notify the lenders not eligible for loan forgiveness. But here's the good part. If the borrower repays the loan after receiving a notification from the SBA has now indicated that it will not seek any further administrative action. This should be a major sigh of relief for many borrowers who have been toiling over these certifications and potential administrative scrutiny. Unfortunately, SBA has still not provided any guidance or meaningful guidance on how it will evaluate whether an applicant made the certification in good faith, or provide the details on many key aspects of the forgiveness calculations. There's also increasing pressures for many trade organizations, members of Congress, and frankly, tens of thousands of businesses around the country to alter the forgiveness rules and the time periods. So at least for the moment, we expect the PPP saga will continue. Many businesses are also starting to turn their attention to the Main Street lending programs. In the last few weeks, some of the general terms of those programs have started to come into focus. There have been some changes. The Fed has changed the parameters for eligible borrowers from a maximum of 10,000 employees or 2.5 billion in revenues to organizations with at most 15,000 employees or less than 5 billion in revenues. They've also lowered the individual loan amounts from 1 million to 500,000 in most of the programs, and made it clear that interest and principal payments are deferred up to 1 year. Interest on these loans will be calculated at the 1 month or 3 month LIBOR plus 3%. And a new priority loan program has been established, which provides a maximum 6 times adjusted EBITDA loan option for lenders who retain 15% of the risk. So that's new. The Fed has also provided guidance on somehow that the EBITDA calculations are to be made. But like the PPP program, the devil's in the details. And businesses need to be wary of restrictions regarding payment of dividends and distributions, outsourcing and offshoring jobs, and remaining union neutral in union organizing efforts. So stay tuned, as we all are expecting more guidance on the Main Street lending programs in the coming weeks. I'm sure we could spend the rest of the day describing the details of the other governmental relief programs, but I think there are some key takeaways for businesses. I mean, they need to closely monitor and evaluate the details of these programs, understand how they all fit together and it will affect operations going forward. There also needs to be a clear understanding of expectations, both from a legal and reputational standpoint. And now more than ever, businesses need to surround themselves with forward-thinking, trusted advisors that can help them make the tough decisions in the coming weeks and months ahead. So with that, I think we are a little bit over, but we probably have a few minutes for questions. So I'm going to turn it back over to David Quam to moderate the questions. Thank you.
Folks, thank you very much. That was a fantastic presentation about what is yet to come. For all of our attendees, if you would please use the chat room to send any questions you may have. This is certainly a period of transition, both from a policy standpoint and a business standpoint. I think it's a real point of inflection for all of us, moving from sort of emergency response to taking a look at the long term. If anyone has any questions, please go ahead and send them through chat. If not, Peter, I did have one question for you, following up on your point about really looking at what's happening in the states and the counties. And we had a short discussion about what was happening in Wisconsin. How do you see sort of the political realm and the fights between legislatures and governors affecting business down the road? Does it create more uncertainty? And how can we help businesses get through that?
Thanks, David. Yeah, you're absolutely right to focus in on that intersection of policy and politics with business. One of the things that we've been seeing out in the market is that the lack of clear guidance from a political and public policy perspective has translated into the business and legal world in a couple of ways. One, it's increased significantly the degree of uncertainty about what the rules of the road will be tomorrow versus what they are today, set aside what they'll be 2 weeks from now. And that uncertainty has caused a lot of businesses both to have difficulty in obtaining new or renewed or additional financing, other than financing directly from the government, which, as Raja was explaining, is on different and often concessionary terms. So we've seen that discord, we've seen that disconnect play out in a dollars and cents perspective. We've also seen the continued uncertainty from political and public policy perspective play out operationally, which is to say, as businesses make this pivot, as people start to realize that whether they had intended for it to be this way or not, that virtually every business has a national or even global footprint, sometimes inadvertently, when you think about the supply chains and customer bases and financing arrangements that folks have in place, that the uncertainty about exactly what is U.S. policy, let alone what are U.S. politics, has made it even more difficult operationally to right-size supply chains, to try to build in necessary redundancies, to try to switch production from a place that's shut down to a place that looks like it might be open. So we're seeing it in that respect as well. And I think that's why our view, based on what we're seeing out in the market, is that the companies that are navigating this most successfully are looking at both sides of the coin. They're looking at the politics and public policy, and they're looking at how that intersects with law and regulation.
Peter, I appreciate that. I'm going to take a moderator's privilege here and ask the three of you one more quick lightning round for everybody. You all have been the leads on our pandemic client special situations team, sort of at the forefront of changing the way Dentons does business. Quickly, how do you see Dentons changing the way we do business as part of our new normal? So I'm going to, Raja, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, just like every business, I mean, our firm is affected. We have to find new ways to work together. We have to find new ways to provide our services. I mean, I think most of our attorneys, at least in this region, we've been working from home for about 2.5 months. And that would have seemed almost impossible 6 months ago or a year ago. Now it is the new normal. I suspect that will continue into the future. So it's just keeping abreast of the new innovations, making sure that we understand what our clients need, how best to serve them. I think it's understanding our employees' needs and respecting those. Jen went into a lot of what every employer needs to be doing in this new normal, and our firm is the same. But I really like how we're positioned sort of in the market. You know, our global and national breadth and depth has really been incredible to tap into over these couple weeks and months. And, you know, I think our task force has been very successful in doing so, and just making sure that our clients' needs are met and their issues are resolved. So, you know, we're just like every business, we're struggling, but we're finding a way to make it work just like everyone else.
Jen, you want to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that we're, based on the observations, David, we've been seeing some shifts in just the nature and scope and volume of services that we've been providing due to COVID-19. I'll give you an example. I know in the litigation world, there's been a suspension of a lot of court proceedings for several weeks now, which has resulted in a delay as far as people being able to just move forward diligently with their cases. I know there's been a slowdown for me, but now that this has continued to go on for a bit, people have now had to change the way they conduct business, particularly in litigation. So people are starting to do Zoom type depositions, video depositions. I'm aware of colleagues who've also done mediations via video, and there are logistical issues that we have to get comfortable with working in an environment where we cannot physically see one another, and we expect those changes to continue to evolve and technology to continue to be there to meet them.
Peter, I'm going to give you the last word and then I'll wrap up.
Thanks, David. In short, for me, we are very much open for business. We had already built into the model of the firm, thanks to our size and scale, and frankly, our sort of desire to build a resilient workplace where it really is, this is a service business. We are all about serving clients. So in many senses, really very little has changed. We have loads of technology tools and platforms that we had already implemented prior to the shutdown orders, prior to we sort of all embarking in this next new normal. And so from that perspective, it's full steam ahead. As Jen and Raja and you have rightly noted, David, though, full steam ahead within a new context where maybe instead of putting on a shirt and tie to go to the office, I put on a t-shirt and a baseball hat and go downstairs. You know, that's a sort of change on the margins, but it's one we are navigating right alongside our clients every day.
Well, for all, Peter, Raja, and Jennifer, thank you so much for your time this morning. For everyone who has joined us, again, this was our 11th webinar. We will continue to hold these every Friday. If you have certain topics that you would like to see us address, please feel free to email any one of us as we put this programming together on a weekly basis, and we will continue it as long as there is a need. And certainly our clients and everybody's looking to find that new normal. With that, I wish everybody a very healthy, safe weekend. And as your states begin to reopen and you begin to go out, please help everybody by practicing social distance, helping your neighbor. If you need help or additional information from Denton's, please feel free to visit our COVID-19 hub. The link is here on this last page. This entire presentation and the PowerPoint will be available on that hub later today. Have a healthy and safe weekend. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you soon.